Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. Can you kindly rise as the speakers in the chair take their seats? Kindly put your phones on silent. Thank you.
Please, you may take your seats. Thank you.
Let me begin with welcoming all of you. Those of you here with us in the auditorium and our audience online. Today's second day of the Gaas Public Forum 2026. Now, Madam President of the Academy, past presidents, vice presidents, and fellows of the Academy, our distinguished speakers for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this second day of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Public Forum for this year under the theme Citizens and Democratic Consolidation in Ghana, the Rights, Obligations, and Duties. The Public Forum, it's a very important program on the Academy's annual calendar as it provides the platform for academics, for policy makers, practitioners, and the public to deliberate on critical issues of national significance. Yesterday, we began this discussion by addressing the imperatives of citizenship in sustaining and consolidating Ghana's democracy as a topic that laid the groundwork for today's dialogue on the theme, the citizen as sovereign in a democracy, the rights, the obligations, and the responsibilities. So the rights, the obligations, and the responsibilities of the citizen as the sovereign in our democracy. What a theme for us to deliberate upon tonight. Our distinguished speakers for today will examine how to navigate the challenges of exercising power as citizens while honoring the obligations to the state. And I encourage all of us to pay attention and to benefit with the knowledge that we gained from our speakers, to benefit from them as individuals, and as members of community in contributing to consolidating our democracy. This event is being streamed live on the Academy's Zoom, YouTube, and its Facebook platforms. So it's not only those of us here in the auditorium that are going to benefit from the wisdom and the knowledge of our speakers. So with that said, it is my distinctive and distinguished honor too to introduce to you the chair for this evening's session, Emerita Professor Techua Menu, my senior colleague both at the University of Ghana and here on the fellowship list of the Academy. Emerita Professor Menu is an emerita professor at the University of Ghana. For those of our young men and women here who do not know what an emeritus or an emerita professor is, it is someone who is over-distinguished in the ranks of professors. Someone from whom professors would learn from. So Emerita Professor Menu served as the director of the Social Development Policy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa between 2014 and 2017. And she also served as the director of the Institute of African Studies of the University of Ghana from 2002, that's 2002 to 2009. In 2022, she was appointed a senior fellow at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development here in Accra, and was further appointed as honorary professor at Nelson Mandela University, which is at Port Elizabeth in South Africa, a year later in May 2023. So Professor Menu holds an undergraduate degree in law from the University of Ghana, a master's degree also in law from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and a PhD in anthropology from Indiana University, which is at Bloomington in the USA. Her research, scholarly and advocacy interests include African development, human rights, women's rights and empowerment, contemporary African migration theory and practice, and African higher education systems. And these are academic and policy areas in which she has published widely. She was elected as the vice president of this academy, the arts section of this academy in 2024, and received several awards and recognitions, which include the University of Ghana's Meritorious Service Award in 2007, the officer class of the Ghana Order of the Volta. This was in 2008. She's also been honored with a doctorate degree from the University of Success. This was in 2015. And also the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law in 2023. So this is our very distinguished chair lady for the session. Once again, let me welcome you to day 2 of the public forum for this year. And let us all look forward to another enlightening day. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I was telling the Assistant Honorary Secretary that he's a salesman. He forgot to tell you that when you are an emerita, emeritus, honorary, it means that you are not paid. So that is the most important thing. You can be as distinguished as anything, but you do not get paid. Madam President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, Vice President, Sciences of the Academy, Fellows of the Academy, both here and those joining virtually, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our beloved and perpetual students. Welcome once again to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and to day 2 of the 2026 Gaas Public Forum on Citizens and Democratic Consolidation in Ghana, Rights, Obligations, and Duties. Some of you were here yesterday when we started, where, as the Assistant Honorary Secretary has reminded us, we began our discussion by focusing on the imperatives of citizenship in sustaining and consolidating Ghana's democracy, as a breakdown of the theme of citizens and democratic consolidation in Ghana. Today, our sub-theme is on the topic, the citizen as sovereign in a democracy, rights, obligations, and responsibilities. And the key word here is about sovereign. And it is important that we dwell a bit on this sovereignty of the people. Yesterday we were told that, democracy has two sides. There's both the supply and the demand side. And whereas we have the government and the institutions, etc., we also have the citizenry, and we were reminded that we must also do our part. And if you look at our Constitution, the preamble starts with "we the people." We the people. So basically the Constitution is saying that power emanates from the people, that the legitimacy of the Constitution is based in the people. This is what the Constitution says. If you like, this is the normative framework. And as we were reminded yesterday, Article 1 of the Constitution, Article 1, Clause 1 says, the sovereignty of Ghana resides in the people of Ghana, in whose name and for whose welfare the powers of government are to be exercised in the manner and limits laid down in the Constitution. So the government is the agent of the people. We tend to think of the government as Abai. It's the government that has the power, right? And they can do as they like. We are inverting the equation. And I see our policemen here in uniform, who are often the representatives of the government. So when I was growing up in our village, when policemen came, some people fled into the bush because it meant that they were going to be arrested. Okay. But what the Constitution is telling us is that all of them, from the president, vice, ministers, regional ministers, all of them, the police, the army, they are agents of the people. The power does not flow from them to us. We are the ones who have given them a bit of our power to do things in our name. This is the concept of sovereignty. You are the supreme people. Now, we were reminded yesterday that a lot is said, but the reality may be different. So today we are going to look at this concept of sovereign citizens, and also to, first of all, understand what it means concretely and what the rights, obligations, and responsibilities are. And to help us with this topic, we have invited two very special people. And they've broken the topics that they have chosen to speak on will help clarify for us this concept of the citizen as sovereign. So the first topic says the burden of informed citizenship. So it's not just about being a citizen. You must be informed. You must know your rights. You must know your responsibilities. Okay. But they call it a burden. It's a task. It's like it's sitting on your shoulders. The burden of informed citizenship in the digital age. And it's broken down further into media, disinformation, and democratic responsibility. We heard a lot about AI and digitization, etc. yesterday. And the majority of you in the room are the digital experts. As for us, we are, what do we call ourselves? The digital nomads, or yesterday we were born before computer. So the issue of media, the issue of disinformation, it's not just information, disinformation, and democratic responsibility. And the person who will be presenting this to us is Mr. George Sapon, who is the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission. The second topic is putting citizens at the center of Ghana's democracy, the unfinished business of democratization. And the speaker for this topic will be Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu, who is the Executive Director of Star Ghana Foundation. So let me just tell you a little bit about our speakers. As I said, Mr. George Sapon is the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission, and he also serves on the board of the National Communications Authority. He's a former lecturer at the University of Ghana, the University of Media, Arts and Communication, and the Accra Technical University. And he has advised various governments and international organizations on media and communications policy, and was a founding staff member of the Media Foundation for West Africa and founder of the Youth Network for Human Rights and Democracy. Our second speaker, Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu, who is the Executive Director of the Star Ghana Foundation, and he is also the convener of the Ghana Civil Society Forum. He's a social development expert with over 30 years' experience in development management, social policy influencing, and institutional and organizational strengthening. He has led in the development and implementation of significant governance and social development programs and initiatives in Ghana, and was a member of the recent Constitutional Review Committee set up by the President of Ghana in 2025. He holds a master's degree in social policy from the Center for Social Policy Studies, University of Ghana, Legon, a bachelor's degree in administration from the School of Administration, University of Ghana, and is currently pursuing a PhD in social policy at the University of Ghana, Legon. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. And I would like now to invite Mr. George Sapon to give us his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Chair, and President of the Academy and the other distinguished members. I want to seek permission, as the Nigerians have taught us, to stand on existing protocol. And I'm really grateful also to Prof for so eloquently explaining the topic and the challenge that is before us. Her explanation throws me back to some of the profound moments yesterday for me. And one question that stuck with me was the big question about what does it mean to be a citizen? And what does it mean to be a spectator? We know this combination about being a citizen and a spectator. And yesterday, the speakers left us with some really thought-provoking questions about this. The centrality of that for our discussion this evening is because in democratic theory, the citizen, as Prof just explained, is sovereign, endowed with rights, agency, and ultimate authority over the state. This theory assumes an informed citizen capable of reasoned judgment and meaningful participation. Yes. In ancient Athens, participation in the polis presupposed not only the right to speak, but the capacity for reasoned judgment. In the assemblies of Athens, citizens gathered not merely to express opinion, but to exercise judgment. The right to speak was inseparable from the expectation that one spoke with knowledge or at least with a seriousness about truth. Democracy in its earliest form did not imagine the citizen as a passive bearer of rights, but as an active participant in reasoned deliberation. Centuries later, in the Roman Republic, civic virtue and duty were understood as indispensable to the republic's maintenance. Citizenship was conceived as both an entitlement and an obligation. The stability of the state depended on a civic ethic grounded in discipline, responsibility, and attentiveness to the common good. To be a citizen was to carry a burden to be informed enough to judge and disciplined enough to act in the interest of the community. In both traditions, citizenship carried an implicit burden. I suggest that this proposition remains normatively valid and central to democratic theory today. Jürgen Habermas, for example, argues that democratic legitimacy depends upon reasoned public discourse through which citizens collectively deliberate about matters of common concern. Like Habermas, the framers of our Constitution believed in informed citizenry as a precondition for democratic development. This explains the Constitution's emphasis on laying strong foundations, respectively, for civic education through the establishment of the National Commission for Civic Education and for independent media institutions through the establishment of the National Media Commission. Further, our electoral system assumes that voters can make reasoned choices. This was the ideal and the vision. But what has been the reality? Data from Afrobarometer suggests that political knowledge among Ghanaian citizens is very limited. The data show that 64% of Ghanaians believe politics and government are too complicated to understand. Many reasons may account for this. Democracy asks something difficult of the ordinary citizen. It asks people not only to live their private lives, but also to participate meaningfully in public life. A democratic citizen is expected to follow political affairs, evaluate leaders critically, understand policies, distinguish truth from manipulation, and make informed choices about the direction of the society. In theory, this responsibility is central to democratic life because democracy assumes that political power, as Prof just explained, ultimately rests with the people. A society can only govern itself well if its citizens are reasonably informed about the issues that affect them. Yet, the democratic citizen is not only a citizen. The democratic citizen is also a worker, a parent, a trader, a student, a driver, a farmer, a tenant, and a survivor. Long before most people have the luxury of studying policy debate or interpreting parliamentary proceedings, they must first solve the immediate problems of existence itself. They must secure food, income, transport, rent, school fees, healthcare, and physical security. In societies facing economic strain, this burden becomes even heavier. Survival consumes attention. Prof. Chair, this creates one of the central tensions of democratic life. The responsibility to be informed competes constantly with the responsibility to survive. In principle, these responsibilities are connected. A politically informed population can help create better governance. Good governance can produce economic stability, social order, investment in education, healthcare, and more equitable opportunities for citizens. But there's a distance in that logic. The benefits of informed citizenship are often indirect, delayed, and uncertain, while the pressures of survival are immediate and concrete. The transport fair due this evening is more immediate than constitutional reform next year. Human beings naturally prioritize what threatens them now over what may benefit them later. And I think on this, Machiavelli was right in The Prince. This tendency is not simply laziness or civic irresponsibility. It reflects the way human attention operates under pressure. As we say in communication, scarcity narrows focus. When people are struggling materially, they devote more mental energy to immediate necessities and less to abstract institutional questions. Under such conditions, politics can begin to feel distant, exhausting, and secondary to everyday life. At the same time, modern public affairs are genuinely complicated. Contemporary governance involves intricate systems of finance, law, regulation, international relations, energy policy, taxation, technology, AI. Even highly educated citizens often struggle to fully understand the mechanics of modern states. Prof. Chair, when my brother Yansaku had the privilege of being here the last time, he reminded us of Abinchi before Hallelujah. Perhaps today we may add Abinchi before Constitution. The problem is not necessarily that citizens are incapable of understanding politics. Often they understand perfectly well the practical effects of governance on their daily lives. They know when inflation is worsening their conditions. They know when corruption is pervasive. They know when public services fail. But they may not possess the technical vocabulary through which politics is formally discussed. As a result, many conclude that politics itself is too complicated. This speaks to what political scientists would describe as a political efficacy gap and indeed democratic and civic virtue deficit. The media environment further deepens this problem. Modern media systems reward speed, outrage, conflict, and emotional stimulation more than careful explanation. Public discourse increasingly privileges scandal over policy analysis. Citizens are flooded with information, yet much of this information does not increase understanding. Instead, it fragments attention and overwhelms the public sphere with competing claims, half-truths, partisan narratives, and sensationalism. Let me share an example. A few years ago, a young nurse and a young doctor had a little disagreement at the Mansia Government Hospital in Kumasi. The father of the doctor went to verbally attack the nurse. The Ghana Registered Nurses and Midwives Association went on strike in support of the nurse. The Junior Doctors Association supported the doctor. Things spiraled into a national crisis. In all this, many media houses covered the issue extensively and gave spokespersons of the various factions ample opportunity to go at each other in the media. TV stations gave us footages of the hospital. There are cameras everywhere. Yet, nobody told us what the actual problem was, much less how to solve it. What was the problem? The hospital had acquired an e-health system that admitted prescriptions straight into the billing system. So even if the hospital could not supply the drugs, the patient was billed. And only the doctor could alter the prescription to avoid overbilling. A patient had been billed for a prescription that the hospital had not supplied. The young nurse thought it was unfair. But the doctor was the only person who could change it. The doctor, too, had closed after exerting herself on duty. The father had come to pick her up and was far from the hospital when the nurse called. This was the basis of the conflict. Clearly, both the doctor and the nurse were victims of the procurement of an e-health system that had constrained them. Yet, many media outlets concentrated on the conflict. Madam Chair, as I speak about our work and our colleagues, it is only fair that we also pause to acknowledge some true shining lights. My brother Samuel Atamensa and his team at City, including Bernard Avle, Samson Ladi, Nyenene Evans Mensah, Kwame Sifaka, and a few others, really give us hope. But again, their work is challenged by digital platforms whose very architecture fragments public attention and weakens traditional mechanisms of verification. These platforms originally democratized expression in profound and important ways. Through them, marginalized voices could speak directly to national and global audiences by circumventing authoritarian structures to organize rapidly, expose wrongdoing, and participate in public debate with unprecedented immediacy. Today, digital platforms operate through algorithms optimized not necessarily for truth or democratic health, but for engagement. Content that provokes outrage, fear, tribal loyalty, or emotional intensity is more likely to circulate widely because such emotions sustain attention and interaction. In this environment, virality often becomes more powerful than credibility. Artificial intelligence complicates the problem further. Madam Chair, the digital citizen therefore confronts an information environment radically different from that assumed by classical democratic theory. Citizens are no longer merely required to access information. They must continuously navigate competing narratives, manipulated content, algorithmic amplification, anonymous influence networks, deepfakes, synthetic media, and increasingly sophisticated forms of psychological targeting. The burden of citizenship in the digital age is therefore not simply the burden of being informed. It is the burden of remaining intellectually disciplined within an environment structurally designed to reward distraction, immediacy, emotional reaction, and informational excess while struggling with the demands of daily life. Into this already difficult environment enters disinformation, one of the greatest contemporary threats to informed citizenship. And when we talk of disinformation, we are dealing with the deliberate or strategic spread of misleading narratives intended to shape perception, manipulate emotion, and influence behavior. Its effectiveness lies in its ability to exploit basic features of human psychology. To be clear, disinformation didn't start today. It existed way before Athenian democracy. One classic example can be found in the Bible, for those who are familiar with the Bible. In 1 Kings chapter 21, we encounter a king called Ahab, who coveted the vineyard of Naboth, his neighbor. Naboth didn't sell the vineyard because it was his ancestral inheritance. Then comes in Queen Jezebel. Through a sophisticated scheme of disinformation, the wife of the king, Jezebel, got the community to hate Naboth and got him stoned to death, so the king would have the vineyard. So disinformation is not new. What is new about modern disinformation operations is how it exploits the logic of digital platforms and artificial intelligence to accelerate information flow. This has fundamentally altered the conditions under which citizens know, judge, and act, and erodes the capacity of individuals to form beliefs based on credible information and to participate in public reasoning. Madam Chair, we may be far from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, but we are not entirely free from some of the dystopian experiences suffered by his character, John the Savage. We live in a world where one cannot rely anymore on John Milton's self-writing ideal that in a free and open encounter, truth will eventually overcome falsehood. Algorithmic manipulation, echo chambers, and confirmation biases challenge that ideal. It is sometimes assumed that disinformation is primarily the burden of the less educated citizen. That assumption may be intuitively appealing, but contemporary evidence suggests a more unsettling conclusion. Disinformation is not socially selective in any stable sense. It is structurally indifferent to education, rank, or institutional position. It traverses the entire architecture of society, including its highest offices in the executive, legislature, and judiciary. You doubt this? Madam Chair, let's look at some evidence. Recently, President John Mahama publicly circulated a claim congratulating astronaut Kosh for carrying the Ghana flag into space. I think we can see this was the tweet. The claim was subsequently shown to be unfounded, and the associated image was identified as digitally manipulated. The significance of the episode lies not in the error itself, but in its location within the symbolic apex of the state. When synthetic or false imagery briefly acquires presidential validation, disinformation ceases to be an external social pathology and becomes an internal risk in state communication. It enters the security of sovereign authority itself, and especially by a man who outside politics is acknowledged by his own professional peers as a top-class expert in the field of communication. For our students, let me pause for a moment to tell you something. Put politics aside. The issues I'm talking about, if you are talking about this country's topmost or Africa's topmost experts, your president is one of them. Okay? And I think that it's a moment of embarrassment for some people, but I'll do it. The entire communications architecture of this country was framed by John Mahama as chair of NCA, the National Communications Authority Board, and I have spotted a gentleman in the corner there. Dr. Edu, you need to show yourself to inspire the students. Dr. Benedu, I want the students to see you. This is the engineer whose work created the massive communications infrastructure we all enjoy through telephony, internet, and everything. And he worked with John Mahama then as board chair of NCA. So if he is caught by this, you should understand the challenge that we are talking about. If gold rusts, what will iron do? A comparable logic is obtained within the legislative sphere. We saw Honorable Abu Jinapor recently insinuate against Honorable Sam George for watching pornography while sitting in Parliament. And the strategic irony that morality policeman on LGBTQ and guardian of national values, Honorable Sam Jatta George, was caught in this act was going to be, to put it mildly, as hilarious as we can see. But fact checkers cut the Christmas short when they exposed the image to be fake. And I want us to just quickly listen to Honorable Abu Jinapor on the floor of Parliament. So this was can you see the difference? It's almost impossible to tell. In the fake one, we decided not to carry the pornography. I think it is there. Please forgive me, Academy, but we needed this illustration. Sorry. And let us listen to Honorable Abu Jinapor on the floor of the House.
Once at it, the Honorable Sam George, as an elder of the Perez Chapel, not a member, as an elder of the Perez Chapel, and as somebody who espouses his Christian values, should also be mindful of what he watches when he's in Parliament. He should be mindful of that as well, especially what...
That's enough. Honorable Jinapor was so sure of the material. But what he saw that led him to make this statement on the floor of the House was fake. That is the challenge of disinformation. Prof. Chair, the judiciary, conventionally regarded as the most insulated site of institutional reasoning, has not been exempt from the pressures of disinformation. In the case of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters versus the National Media Commission and the Attorney General, the court ruled that, and I quote, a system whereby media content must be officially cleared before it can be broadcast or published is unacceptable in law. In other words, the court is saying that the law that was before them had required that broadcasters must submit their content to the National Media Commission for verification before it is broadcast. The truth was that there was no such provision in the law. And I repeat that. There was no such provision in the law. The only place where we had found this was a coordinated campaign on social media, especially Facebook, where some people with interest in the matter had repeatedly projected this interpretation as regarding the law. So, Madam Chair, across the executive, legislature, judiciary, as you have shown, and the media, a common pattern emerges. Disinformation does not respect the conventional hierarchy of expertise or institutional insulation. This is why the challenge before us requires a whole of society approach. Education institutions must cultivate critical reasoning and civic literacy. Universities, research institutes, and think tanks must make knowledge publicly accessible rather than confining expertise within elite circles. And this is where I commend the Academy once again for creating this kind of platform and for allowing people like us to be part of it, but particularly our students. I'm really grateful for this. The state also has an obligation to create the information condition necessary for informed citizenship. It is precisely for this reason that the 1992 Constitution, as I've already argued, created the National Commission for Civic Education and the National Media Commission. The framers understood that democracy requires institutions capable of nurturing informed citizenship. But once again, this is where one of Ghana's deepest constitutional contradictions emerge. When democratic societies constitutionalize media freedom, they usually answer two related questions. Freedom from what and freedom for what? Freedom from censorship, harassment, power restraint, and government interference is indispensable. But freedom also exists for a purpose: to sustain public reasoning, democratic accountability, civic education, and informed citizenship. Ghana answered the first question with admirable clarity, but the second question was left underdeveloped both in policy and in institutional practice. Freedom for what? What normative obligations accompany media freedom in a constitutional democracy? What institutional framework ensures that media power contributes to informed citizenship rather than information chaos? What mechanisms protect ordinary citizens, especially the poor and powerless, from reckless distortion and reputational distraction? The institution constitutionally designed to help answer these questions was the National Media Commission. Yet, the commission itself was substantially weakened. I have already referred to the case of the Giba versus the National Media Commission, in which the court significantly narrowed the commission's capacity to establish general standards for media performance. In effect, the court insulated media freedom from broader public interest obligations while leaving the commission with limited practical authority to shape the ethical architecture of the media environment. At the same time, the same court, in other contexts, adopted an extraordinarily punitive posture towards media expression, especially in contempt of court cases. During the 2012 election petition proceedings, commentators and media actors were repeatedly jailed for contemptuous commentary. Of course, one may argue that the legal questions in these cases differed. Formally, they did. But institutionally and democratically, they generate a deeper analytical difficulty. On one hand, the court disables the independent constitutional regulator from establishing broad standards capable of protecting society from media excesses. On the other hand, the court aggressively deploys its own coercive powers when media attacks are directed at the judiciary itself. This creates profound uncertainty about the permissible boundaries of free expression in Ghana. The practical principle that begins to emerge is troubling. The gravest offense appears to be criticism of judges, while the ordinary citizen injured by reckless falsehood is left to private litigation, public humiliation, or silence. And once citizens lose confidence in the possibility of public knowledge, democratic culture itself begins to erode. Society enters a vicious cycle in which information chaos produces civic exhaustion. Civic exhaustion produces disengagement, and disengagement further weakens democratic accountability. Citizens become overwhelmed by noise, yet deprived of understanding. This is why the current constitutional movement is so important. The recommendations of the Constitution Review Committee, chaired by Professor Kwesi Prempeh, and including my brother Tanko, deserve serious and urgent national reflection. The proposals on the media reflect one of the deepest attempts in recent constitutional thought to reconcile media freedom with democratic responsibility. The committee recognized that a forward-looking regulatory system must protect expression while simultaneously cultivating an information ecosystem capable of producing informed citizens. Ultimately, The question before us is whether we can build constitutional and institutional arrangements capable of ensuring that freedom serves the democratic reasoning necessary for informed citizenship. Kwame summarizes this pithily. The state of the media is a media-state relationship. In other words, the information and media ecosystem of every society is a product of the institutional and regulatory arrangement the society makes for the growth and development of informed citizenship. And I cannot conclude without a brief statement about the current public controversy surrounding speech-related arrests, protests, and accusations. Too often, we approach these incidents as contests between political parties in terms of their attitude towards free expression. That may well be so to some degree, but beneath them lies a deeper structural problem, the failure of independent regulation. When legitimate regulatory institutions are weakened, powerful actors resort to self-help. The judiciary deploys their contempt powers, as I've already demonstrated. Parliament summons journalists before Privileges Committee, as they did some time ago to Egbefable and others. The executive is accused of using security agencies. Political actors mobilize partisan intimidation. In the absence of a credible and authoritative regulatory framework, every institution begins protecting itself through its own coercive instruments. If the National Media Commission possessed the institutional authority, legitimacy, and operational effectiveness originally envisioned by the Constitution, many of these matters would have been addressed within the media regulatory system, within a principled democratic framework, before they degenerate into the controversies we see today. We must act to save our democracy now. The danger, if we fail to act, is that the culture of institutional self-help may eventually migrate beyond the state itself into society at large. Once citizens lose confidence that democratic institutions can mediate informational conflict fairly, the temptation towards direct retaliation against what they consider media wrongs grows stronger. And that is a dangerous path for any democracy. To conclude, Prof. Chair, democracy in the digital age, I submit, depends on informed citizenship. The greatest danger before us is disinformation and the gradual collapse of the institutions capable of helping citizens distinguish truth from spectacle, knowledge from noise, and democratic responsibility from digital chaos. Addressing this requires a whole of society approach. If we fail in that responsibility, we will create even greater democratic disorder. And the controversy surrounding the arrest of people like Abronye will come to the end, to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sapon. Can we give him another round of applause? I have great pleasure in inviting Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu to speak to us on putting citizens at the center of Ghana's democracy, the unfinished business of democratization.
Madam Chairperson, Madam Presidents of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, fellows and members of the Academy, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, fellow students, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I attended a conference somewhere outside the country, and we're asking, what do you find peculiar about various African countries you've visited? And one lady from Senegal, I don't know where she heard it, she said in Ghana, when people get up to deliver speeches and etc., they start by saying that before I speak, I want to say something. So, Madam Chair, before I speak, I want to say something. And that something is the fact that when I got the invitation from Prof. Menu to speak, to make a presentation, I thought that it was one of the usual things. So I said, oh, okay, no problem, I'll do it. Then shortly afterwards, I got an email. Please send us the 200-word synopsis of. I said, hey, where is this thing going? Then shortly afterwards, I got another email that your presentation should be not more than 10,000 words, calibre 10, aligned, the referencing. I said, hey, this one I won't do again. But so I was just wondering, come and speak before the Ghana Academy, what was I going to say? So you can imagine my huge sigh of relief when I saw the bus loads of my fellow students coming. I said, aha, my people are here. So we can speak without extensively quoting somebody said this and then George Sapon 2026 before. But we are here. The second thing I want to say before I speak is just an issue with the topic. The frame is about democratic consolidation. But when I was deciding on the topic for my presentation, I decided to talk about the unfinished business of democratization. Because I felt that consolidation may imply that we've gotten to a point where perhaps we are okay largely with what we've got. We are pulling it together into a whole, which may be true. But I was also thinking of the fact that we are still in the process of democratization. There are huge gaps in our democratic journey and process, and that perhaps this is not the time to consolidate, but this is the time to ask very, very critical questions. This is the time to unpack a lot of things, and perhaps after we have unpacked, after we have debated and argued and etc., we can begin to consolidate the new meanings that have emerged. And so I see my presentation as part of that whole process of critically examining our current state of democracy and to see where we need to maybe change a few things or maybe a radical reform, etc., etc. And I'll speak on that as I move on. And the last bit of the saying before speaking is the topic about citizens or citizen sovereignty, putting citizens at the center. And in most cases, when we talk about citizens, it implies a certain homogeneity, a certain homogeneous whole, that there is one group of citizens with the same interests, with the same characteristics, etc. But of course, citizens in Ghana are as diverse as you can find. And therefore, in talking about citizens, we need to be very careful that we talk about citizens of Ghana in all their diversity, that we don't lose sight of those, because there are some citizens who are at the center. There are some citizens who are at the center. It's not all citizens who are not. And there are those who are far even beyond the periphery. And perhaps we need to focus the discussion on that. And I know time is limited, but when we talked about there are some citizens at the center, I remember at the onset of democracy in 1992, there was a political party, I can't remember whether it was called National Convention Party or something, but its symbol was of maize. You know, you had this red borders and then a corn cob in the middle. And it was what? Or something, yes. And I was in a village somewhere when somebody came to campaign, and he was explaining to the community what the various symbols meant. I wouldn't go into the others. But when he came to that particular one, he said, you see this party, it means that those at the center will have access to the corn or the food. But you, those on the periphery, your eyes will be red, you will see the food, but you won't get it. So, Madam Chairperson, today I will focus largely on those whose eyes are red and looking to get some of the food. So, after saying something, permit me to begin my presentation, Madam Chairperson. I have kind of broken this into 4 areas, and I'll quickly go through because I know time is fast spent. Our students would have to go to school and etc. So the first part, I'll try to speak on the promise and the reality of Ghana's democracy, particularly in relation to citizens' sovereignty. The second part of it would be the whole, what does the Constitution say about citizens' sovereignty and what has been the reality. The third would be based on the reality, what do we need to do, which I call completing the unfinished business or starting conversations on the unfinished business. And the last bit would be the conclusion. Do not be worried about all that because some of them are just one slide that I will go through. Madam Chairperson, I would focus on 1992, even though since independence we've had a very checkered history, particularly around democratic governance and the role of citizens. We do know of the immediate post-independence constitution of the First Republic that at that time sought to build the state. So whilst there were constitutional provisions around citizens' sovereignty and etc., I think the focus was on mobilizing citizens for state building, so to speak. Afterwards, we've had, a number of military regimes, most of them talking about redemption, liberation, and etc., but hardly, really focused on citizens, rights agencies, etc. But somebody was telling me that if you talk about rights and that they didn't exist within the military regimes, if you look at some of the reforms or the programs that the Achampong government introduced, some of them were more far-reaching and had much greater impact on ordinary citizens than even what people had under the democratic constitutional governance. And therefore, in terms of maybe saying that under military rule, citizens did not have any rights, citizens were not at the center, and etc., perhaps need to be interrogated. But I think since 92, we have arrived. We have had this very long and broken period of constitutional rule, and therefore that provides a very good space to begin this interrogation. And overall, before I even get to the conclusion and etc., I'll say that we've had a very checkered, journey since 1992, that we've had democratic stability, we've had elections, conflicts here and there, but not the kind of major conflict breakdown of law and order that we've seen in other African countries. We've had relatively peaceful transfers of power after elections, some very tense and etc., but nonetheless, these transitions have taken place. Maybe at the constituency level, people may go and seize toilets and lorry parks and etc., but nonetheless, we're part of the transition. But at the national level, we've had these regular transitions. We have established the institutions of governance, prescribed by the Constitution, and most of them are working relatively well. You have these hiccups, but those should be expected. I was surprised this evening to see a statement made by the majority leader, honorable majority leader. Of course, that a bill was passed yesterday the speaker says, the bill has not been passed, he's kind of maybe reversing it something. The majority leader says it has been. So, but these are the contestations that they go with the territory. And I don't think that those ones, they are lessons for us to learn, but they are par for the course. We have a constitution that spells out the rights of citizens, etc. So on those formalities, the formal part of democracy, the procedural ones, we've done extremely well, particularly if you compare us within the West African sub-region. Of course, with what is happening in Benin and etc., maybe we don't actually hold the title anymore, that other countries are doing that kind of democracy better than us. But at least it gives you a warm feeling inside to think that we are still the leading democratic states within the sub-region. But I think that as my brother George mentioned in part of his presentation, we assume that with constitutional rule would come automatically democratic fulfillment. That constitutional rule would automatically place citizens at the center, that it would lead to the kind of democracy where we think or we see that citizens are at the center, citizens are able to influence policy, citizens are able to hold government accountable and etc. And my premise is that this is not the case, particularly in Ghana since '92. And this kind of, the diagram shows what I mean. The procedural democracy, which we've done very well, versus the substantive democracy, where we're looking at the democratic dividends that was spoken about yesterday. People are asking, after we don't go to market with constitution, what has the democratic rule given us, who consults us, and etc. So that the gap between the procedural and the substantive is quite wide, and in some people's opinion, is widening as we go on. The Constitution gives expression to the concept of sovereignty. It's grounded in the principle that ultimate political power resides in citizens, and it confers rights and responsibilities on them. But just to say that ultimately we think that power comes from the people, it is exercised on their behalf. They have the means to be able to hold those that have been elected and those that are in government accountable, and are able to ask questions and are able to change them whenever it is necessary. But is that the case in Ghana? And somebody say, well, why would you think that citizens should be at the center? Why that? And my point is that the Constitution itself recognizes the concept of citizen sovereignty. And the preamble, as has been mentioned, starts with, we, the people of Ghana, give to ourselves, etc., 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 this Constitution. So it starts, being the preamble, being the beginning of the Constitution, it gives notice, so to speak, that everything emanates from the people. Legitimacy is derived from the people themselves, and it is the people of Ghana who have enacted this Constitution. Other articles, go on to give effect to this. Article 1 talks about the sovereignty resides in the people of Ghana, in whose name, for whose welfare the powers of government are to be exercised. Article 42 says every citizen of Ghana above 18 years of age has a right to vote, to be registered as a voter, etc., etc. Even though there are limitations on the age at which you can stand for elections and etc. But the fundamental right to vote, is given to citizens of 18 years and above. Article 240 provides for decentralization so that it is not just at the national level, but that governance needs to be brought closer to the people. We have to provide opportunities for citizens at all levels of governance to be involved in decision making, decision implementation, and to be able to hold officers to account. This is the point I made at the beginning, that we need to nuance this thing about citizenship, and I'll talk about that later as we go on. So what is the reality? We've talked about, I've been seeing some, what do they call it, memes on social media, that what you ordered and what you got. So people will see a dress on social media looking so nice, you order it, it comes, and then the reality is something different. So what is in the Constitution is what we ordered. What we are going to discuss now is what was delivered. And we want to find out, does it correspond to what we saw? So I just put a few blocks in there, which we can interrogate further. That first, the democracy is becoming a democracy of the rich, democracy of the elite. If you don't have money, you can't stand for elections. I think Osai Kwapong talked about the cost of political campaigns and pegged the minimum for a presidential campaign at around $1.6 or $1.5 million. To stand for parliament, the minimum was around $600,000. How many citizens of this country can exercise the rights that the Constitution gives to be able to stand for and be elected based on that cost? And if we have our politicians who don't have that kind of money going to money bags to take money to be able to contest these elections, to who, or is it to whom, whatever, will they be accountable? Who will they be accountable to? Obviously, it would be to the person who has financed it. It has become transactional, so citizens have seen it. Chino Achebe said, Ineke, the bird says, if men have learned to shoot without missing, the bird has also learned to fly without perching. So citizens say, if we vote for you and you go and we don't see you until the next election cycle, then what we'll do is that we'll take our pound of flesh before we even send you there. So before you come to campaign, you have to pay the knocking fee. When you come, you have to talk about the per diem, you have to talk about the food, you have to talk about the transport. They have to find out what are you giving us before we vote for you. So it's become quite transactional and far from the ideals that we've been talking about, and quite disconnected from the people. Sometimes the disconnection is deliberate, that the processes of governance are made in such a way that, or fashioned in such a way that they are out of reach of the ordinary citizen. Even take some of the bills that go through Parliament. They give 24 hours, 48 hours. If you have any comments on this, please bring your comments before we pass. And how many people can mobilize themselves to make input into the bills before? Or it makes it look like the situation, I think there was going to be an election in one of the constituencies of the districts, one of the parties. The party executives wanted some particular people to be voted for, but they knew that they had to go through the motion of elections. So they brought the people in front. They said, oh, you see these 4 people, they are going to be, for us, they are very good. We don't have any problem with them. But because this is a democracy, if there's anybody here who says that they are not good, please raise up your hand and we'll there. Who was going to raise their hand? But they've gone through that whole process of what? The motion of people electing and etc. So it's become quite disconnected. But citizens also do not want to. Prof. Menu talked about in her youthful days, you see a police person, you run away, And some of that has carried forward, that government is not for us. Government is far away. We don't want to have anything to do with them, But part of it also is the fact that people find that it is more useful, more beneficial, you get more bang for the pound or for the cedi if you dealt directly with an individual than with the government agency. So you want placement for your child in school, you don't talk about GES. You say, oh, do you know anybody at the Ministry of Education? You want a job or somebody wants a job, they come to you, oh, do you know anybody? So it is quite personalized. Citizens are not dealing with the institutions of governance, with the states, but they prefer to do with individuals and etc. I think the second one is the declining trust in public institutions, which has already been mentioned, that people simply don't trust government. They don't trust public institutions. They think that they are corrupt. And I think that the Afrobarometer data has a lot on this, the institutions that are least trusted. I wouldn't mention names because some people are here and I don't want to go into details. But they've talked about, my father was a policeman too, so that was there. But that whole thing about citizens don't trust public institutions generally, and as a result, do not want to engage with them as a rule. Local government, we rolled out our decentralization plan. We said it was going to bring governance closer to the people. People will be more engaged. But what has been the reality? The reality has been that it has become, the assemblies have become almost arms of the central government. District Assembly Common Fund, before it comes, the central government has decided for the districts what should be done with their monies. I think at some point it even got so bad that more than 60% of the assembly funds were earmarked from Accra. And I was actually a witness to, I wouldn't say where, but weedicides and insecticides were purchased in Accra on behalf of district assemblies by central government and sent to the districts. And the assembly chief executives will say, what are we going to do with this? We haven't asked for it. You go to some of the very rural districts, they have bought this very expensive, very state-of-the-art rubbish dumps and sent there. And they're saying that, look, here most of the time in the villages, people prefer to use the rubbish as compost. So these things are standing there. I mean, who's going to put anything in there? And that is, for some people at the center, the concept of decentralization. District chief executives are appointed from Accra. Assembly members who do not vote for the president's nominee, they find ways of getting them out of the place. The 30% membership that was supposed to help address imbalances, to bring in other voices, have become the preserve, or become part of the patronage pot. And we could go on and on. And the fact that most of these assemblies are not economically viable means that they are not able to respond to citizens' issues and demands. And so after making one or two demands, the assembly is not able to, then the citizens just disengage. And so decentralization becomes like a white, am I allowed to say elephant? It becomes a white something that doesn't have any use at all. But yes, it becomes like a white goat, but not really serving the purpose. We talk about the executive dominance, that if they count the number of public officials that the president has to appoint, you ask yourself, is that the only duty of the president of this country? To the point where even now, communication officers of state agencies, you see an announcement, on Jubilee House letterhead, so and so, George Sapon has been appointed the communications director. And I said, what has the presidency got to do with appointing communication directors? So what is the role of the chief executive? So the dominance or the domineering or the dominance of the president, the executive, means that it stifles, any idea about power being dispersed, people being able to influence, and etc. And there are other areas in which, the power of the presidency or the executive simply makes nonsense of a lot of the provisions we have. The issue of inclusion, which I think is something that we need to emphasize, that those at the center have access to the maze that I spoke of at the beginning. Those at the periphery, our eyes are red, but we can't get to this thing. Women form 50% plus of Ghana's population. Take a look at the membership of Ghana's parliament. What is the percentage of women MPs? Go to the district assemblies. What is the percentage of women elected as assembly members? Look at the 30% appointment by the president, to make up the numbers in the assemblies. How many women, even that kind of discretion, how many women are appointed? Look at the ministers. We may have made some progress with the affirmative action and etc. But the reality on the ground, what we ordered, is quite different from what has been delivered to us. Young people, marginalized. Economic disempowerment, political disempowerment, social disempowerment. Everywhere you turn, the operative word is what? Disempowerment. When the constitutional review recommendations of the constitutional review came out, I went to visit my sister, who knew I was a member of the committee. And of all the recommendations we made, she said, you are saying that 30-year-old people should rule this country. What do you mean? And I said, but we've said a lot. No, don't go and bring these white people's things here, and etc. I mean, even 35 years, That whole concept that you have to have the kind of gray beard, the bald head, etc. of the aged, before you should be allowed near the corridors of power. But these are, in our words, the leaders of tomorrow. They are largely excluded. Persons with disability. And even persons living in the deprived areas of the country. You see pictures of citizens or school children in the remote areas of the country wading through rivers to get to school. And these are considered, their parents are considered citizens of this country with the same rights as everybody else and being able to influence. So we see that the reality is that depending on where you stand, you either see the maize but not get to eat it. You see it, you may be able to eat it, or some don't even see it at all, And because of that, we get to a situation where when the president visits any constituency, what do the chiefs and people say? We beg you, fix our roads. We thank you that you gave us a borehole. So it is almost like a favor that is being done rather than a right that is being claimed. The issue of youth disillusionment, I've already talked about it, that young people do not feel they have a stake in the country. They are disillusioned. A lot of them have checked out. A lot of them just, you people do whatever you want to do. We also, some, as was mentioned yesterday, we want to migrate. I met some people who were, let me just say, there was a BBC documentary over the weekend, and they were asking these people, these boats, small boats that you want to use to cross the channel into the UK, most of the time the people die. They say, yes, dying there is better than going back to our countries. Dying in the process is better than going back. That at least there is a 10% chance that I may get there. So that is the level of disillusionment that leads to a lot of disengagement. The media My brother has spoken a lot about it, and I wouldn't dare to start talking when there's a guru around. But I think, in a way, the media has served us well, and in some ways, the media has done a big disservice. Why do I say that? I think media plurality has opened up the spaces, allowed people to call in, people to use the media to articulate, to vent, to engage, and etc. Particularly the talk shows and etc. and the other. We have seen investigative journalists who have emerged, done very, very good work, provided inputs that sometimes is used to hold duty bearers accountable. But for a number of reasons, the media is not able to fulfill that role. I was just looking to see the article of where it is said the media has to yes, Article 1625, that says the media has a responsibility to uphold the responsibility and accountability of government to the people of Ghana. But now, before you get a frequency, you have to have connections. And so the media houses have become extensions of the political class. And therefore, they toe that line. So as soon as, and then somebody was mentioning in the days when Tamale used to be quite, hot and all those things, that somebody went for, when there was this chieftaincy issues, so somebody went to rent a place and they asked, oh, are you Abudu Andani? The person said, oh, as for me, I'm not interested in those kind of things and etc. They said, do you listen to Radio Justice or you listen to, because they knew that each station told a particular line. And it was impossible if you did not belong to that. So the media, instead of becoming the facilitators of national dialogue and etc., become almost like megaphones to amplify the propaganda and etc. of the political class. Likewise, social media. Social media has done a lot, to democratize the space, to make people able to get, their voices heard. I was surprised young men in my village, largely non-literate, set up what they call the WhatsApp by voice. So it is just a voice-only WhatsApp platform. And they have used that to plan, fundraising for community activities, mobilize themselves, etc. So that is the positive side of it. But the disinformation, the misinformation, the misuse of social media also gives you cause to wonder whether this is really, serving its purpose. And of course, the way that the telcos gobble out our data, that you must be a very, very committed person to go and buy the kind of data that is needed that will enable you to follow through and engage in governance using or through the media. So, coming to what's next, I just wanted to frame this, that a necessary condition for true citizen sovereignty is inclusion, where governance systems are accessible to all citizens, irrespective of their status. But as significant challenges remain, and I've talked about that in terms of the marginalization of voices, the agency, and etc., and even in terms of the distribution of benefits. When I was talking about this, the reality, I forgot to talk about my own people, the civil society, that civil society has played a very big role, in the process towards the process of democratization. Think tanks have generated, input for policy, discourse, public education, etc., etc., etc. But when your voice, the okro that you have to take to make your voice smooth enough for you to talk, is provided by somebody else. The day that they stop giving you the okro, your voice vanishes. And I think the decline in external funding is leading to the either the collapse of some CSUs, that the ways in which party foot soldiers come at you when you say something that the government doesn't like or the opposition doesn't like, only the very, very strong and the brave continue to hold government to account. The rest decide to play it very safe, focus on safe topics so that you don't draw the ire, the anger of the foot soldiers. But we cannot develop if we don't have a civil society that is able to, articulate, support, facilitate citizens' engagement in governance. How we do that is something that we need to discuss. But I think that, and civil society is not just about the NGOs and the think tanks. It's even about the Market Women's Association, the local youth associations, and etc. How do we strengthen these? How do we support this? That genuinely they become, mechanisms, instruments through which citizens can engage in governance processes and hold government accountable. So how do they say we cannot return what we got to the retailer from whom we bought the dress. So what kind of adjustments do we need to make it fit for purpose and to come as near as possible to what we saw online and ordered? And I'm proposing 4 areas. I think there are a few more, but because of time, I just decided to say the 4. But if you ask me questions, then I'll bring the other ones. The first is the constitutional reform. And the chairman of the Constitution Review Committee is here, so I wouldn't say much about it, and I'm not speaking as a member of the Constitution Review Committee. But I think that fundamental constitutional reforms are needed. And I think the way in which the Constitution Review Committee framed the recommendations, I think from electoral democracy to developmental democracy, kind of gives a picture of the direction in which we need to go. And Madam Chair, if I will be permitted to just say very briefly some of the recommendations in the review from the review committee that I think would help us, move towards greater citizen sovereignty in our governance. One is the constitutionalization of the right to public participation. That now it has been made a right. The right to participation in governance. So it has strengthened the right to engage Parliament during lawmaking. Most of the time what we hear is that after Parliament has gone on recess, then they say, the MPs are going to their constituencies to explain what has already taken place. But I think this one is seeking to strengthen the engagement in the process of lawmaking and etc. It's also talked about improving the relationship between parliamentarians and citizens, including, the engagement with citizens, greater parliamentary accountability, how the caucuses elect their leaders, etc. There's the one around the topic, the section is called All Development is Local, and it's around decentralization, that we need to start from the local and build up to the national. So the election of MMDCEs, the strengthening of decentralization through various means, even the recommendation that citizens can organize to propose amendments to the Constitution, I think for me is radical and it's something that aligns with the concept of citizen sovereignty. it talks about, I was going to say we talked about, but they talked about, strengthening civic education. I think Madam Adi talked yesterday that, look, everything NCC should do, and yet where are the resources? I think part of the recommendation is about how NCC is strengthened and resourced so that it can act as, the agency for facilitating democratic citizenship. There are recommendations around the Council of State, the judiciary, other institutions of governance that would make them more democratic, that would make them more accountable, and that would make them, act as a check on the excessive powers of the presidency. And then the whole issue about broadening the rights of disadvantaged social groups and young people, persons with disability, older persons. These have found expression in the constitutional review recommendations. And I think that if we mobilize as a society, we don't expect everybody to agree with every recommendation. But even if we agree to discuss, find out which ones do we agree with, which ones don't we agree with, and find ways of engaging with government, that constitutional reform is not a privilege that government is, it's a right. We have a right to be involved in the process of reforming our constitution, rather than being a privilege the government goes through and says, okay, this one will go through, this one will not go through, and etc. So, but anyway, I'm speaking too much on that, and let me be very careful on. Then we talked about the issue of active citizenship, that there has to be a way. People just say, oh, in our days, the student movement was so vibrant, so active, so engaged. But things have changed. Things have changed. And if we continue to look at the student movement and student activism through the lenses of what existed in our time, when the numbers were fewer, when we did not have political parties, and etc., we may be. So how do we start from where the students are now and begin to move towards a situation where we can help them to be more engaged? But active citizenship is not just about students. It's about all of us. Where you see a need, where there's a gap, you step in. We have seen emerging examples. Fix the Country, Economic Fighters, The Chamber Must Fall, Galamsey Coalition Against Galamsey, etc. We need to support those ones, both at the national and the local levels. But we should be conscious of the cost of activism. It is easy for us to say we should be active citizens, etc. But people pay a huge cost. People pay a huge cost. How do we support? How do we safeguard? How do we ensure that we help to mitigate the risks and the cost of activism, so that more Oliver Bamawas and all those things would emerge, more Manasseh Azuris would emerge, that we need those. Then, of course, deepening participation beyond elections. We engage, people wear T-shirts, people go for rallies, so we are very, very engaged during the election process. Right after elections, we take off the T-shirts and then we go back. I think it was, I don't know if it's a prof, but Kojo Techi Asante described this phenomenon as a attached detachment. We are attached to the nation, we are attached to our parties, but we detach. Oh, is it you? Oh. So let me not talk much because the man himself is here, and then I may this. But I think it just summarizes that whole dichotomy. I mean, you get worked up, South Africans are insulting Ghanaians and beating Ghanaians. You can't do that to our Ghanaians. Oh, we are very proud. And yet, you drive through the streets of Accra, and the kind of filth that you see, that one they were not saying that we are proud Ghanaians, so the Ghana shouldn't be as dirty as that. We are not saying that, hey, we are proud Ghanaians. School children should not have to walk through water to get through school. We are not talking about the fact that in one school, one teacher is teaching 6 classes. In a nation where trained teachers are still at home and yet to be deployed. So we are attached to the notion we are Ghanaians. Nobody, even not South Africans, they took money from us. They can't do that to us. We are Ghanaians. Our Black Stars must win. Else. But when our cities are flooded, that one is not the same. So, Master, thank you very much. This attached detachment thing summarizes it very well for me. So I would bring it to a close here. That the disengagement comes at a high cost. It allows unresponsive governance because governments know that, they won't do anything. They will talk about it in the media for 2 days and then something else. And I even hear sometimes governments even come up with things that will divert our attention from what is trending so that we don't discuss it. And nobody follows up. And that to place citizens truly at the center of democracy, we must continue to ask critical questions, challenge decisions that undermine the public interest, and actively engage in shaping governance outcomes. Somebody said the constitutional democracy should not only empower the government to rule, but it should also empower citizens to be involved in governance. Thank you very much.
Oops. Can we have a resounding round of applause for our speaker? He traveled from Tamale to be here with us today. And I think you will agree that both speakers have served us a very rich diet, very thoughtful presentations. But now it's your turn. You've heard them. I'm sure you want, there are some things, many things you agree with. There's a lot of humor. Maybe some things are not quite clear. And then there are some things that you do not agree with. So this is your chance to fire at them. And we're doing better with time today than yesterday. But we know that the students will need to get to school. So let's see, let's start with 5 questions, and I want to go from here and come here. Yeah, so over to you. This side. Don't be shy, I don't want you to discuss in the bus back. We want to hear you now. Any takers here? I'll come back to you. Okay. So let's move to the next. Hello. Can you show by hands if you are ready to ask a question, make a contribution? No, don't look back. Look forward. Yes. Young man, please introduce yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Please, my name is Menu Dankwesi. I'm from Accra Academy. My question is it necessary or is it allowed to have connections so that in case maybe you are planning for something for the near future, you can at least, in case of a backfire, you can have some backup plan?
Can you repeat the question, please?
My question is, in case you want to start something for the near future, and there is a backfire or a setback, can you still keep the connections so that at least you have a backup plan?
Did you get it? Okay, thank you. So we'll collect some questions and then the speakers will respond. The ladies at the back or in front? Oh no, it's the beginning. Over here, any questions? Yes, there's a hand here. Yes, please go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, my question is for Mr. George.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Obin Jr. from Accra Academy.
Okay.
So, Mr. George, please, in your presentation, you stated that right to speak is not necessarily that to talk, but to speak with knowledge and aggressively truth. So, a person who can talk, how do you exercise this right?
A person who
Cannot talk.
cannot speak.
Yes, please.
Okay. There's another hand right there. Yes.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Gideon from Accra Academy, and thank you for the knowledge you've shared. So my question is, what are the policies that are implemented or set up apart from voting for especially the minority to have a crucial impact in the change of government when maybe they find out that the government goes against the words or the promises they've given them, and maybe showing up on social media, when you look at the social media gurus or the media gurus, they are now working for especially profits, or they side with the people that they expect to win. And even talking about religious aspects as well, not only political aspects, it's basically like they're now competing for prestige and social recognition, and not like for the main purpose or ideology. For instance, maybe people in, let me say, the peripheral side or the corners of Ghana, they keep contributing money and stuff for their churches, and they use them to fund for maybe missionary works to reach others. But they are even living in tents or attending churches where it's not even convenient. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, there's a hand here.
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Albert, and I'm from Radio Universe. So my question is directed to Mr. George. When he was speaking on the topic of accountability, he outlined that the burden on citizens is to spot disinformation. So I would want to ask, when state actors or big media houses spread it, who bears the burden of correction? And then are there some mechanisms that exist to hold them to the same standard as citizens? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, there's a hand here, and then we will take some answers and have another round.
Please, good evening.
Good evening.
I go by the name Luntera from Accra Academy, and my question is focused on Mr. Ibrahim. One of the things he stated was the sharing of power, which is mainly focused on the old, because it's portrayed that the youth are not capable of doing the works of the elder. So I wanted to ask, why is it this is the case? Why the case? Because unemployment rates in Ghana as at now is focused on the youth, and the youth are supposed to be the ones in charge of they're supposed to be the ones in charge of being focused on the works of the country. So I want to ask why. Thank you.
Okay, George, shall we start with you?
Thank you very much, Prof. I think the questions are extremely difficult. I won't lie. And I can't pretend that I have answers. So let's shoot that caveat. If you were examiners for the WASI, you'd be very difficult examiners. The first question that you ask about me, what's the right of expression of a person with, say, speech impairment in a democracy? It's not a simple issue. But I think Alhaji Tanko raised the fundamental question about the treatment of the vulnerable in society, including people with disability. The state has a responsibility to construct mechanisms that enable us to reach those people for their opinions on public affairs and also to express concern on matters that affect them. Let's keep in mind that people have different ways of communicating, not only necessarily through the verbal communication as we are doing. So the question you ask, honestly, raises a fundamental question about what the responsibility of the state should be in making sure that everybody within the society has an opportunity to express themselves. So that would be my response. Then the question about religious exploitation and visibility, I'll leave to Alhaji Tanko. But you also, a colleague from here also raised another big question about media responsibility and the way you frame it. If the big media or people with considerable voice within the state, whose responsibility is it to get them to correct it? There are different levels of it. At the formal level, the National Media Commission or media regulators have that responsibility. But more fundamentally, it is an act of decency for every person in society to have the humility for self-correction, honestly and humbly. So if you're a journalist or a media house and you do something that turns out not to be accurate, the first responsibility is on you to correct it. The third level is that the Constitution grants a right of rejoinder to every person who is affected by any kind of media content. So if the content is about a specific person or identifiable community, that group also have a right to a rejoinder, which implies that the media house that carried that material has an obligation to accept an explanation from that group and to carry that explanation with the same prominence with which they had carried the original material. I hope I have attempted the questions. Thank you very much.
When the gurus start passing the questions over to the non-gurus, do you need to have connection as a plan B? It depends on the kind of connection that you are talking about. Of course, we live in a society where connections and networks are valued. We talk about connections in a very negative sense, but I think the social networks that are a part of our culture, a part of our tradition, are the things that have helped to make us resilient. And for some of us, we couldn't have even gone to the university, but for those connections. So if it was time to go to school, an aunt would come, take this, you buy water on the way, even though it wasn't for water, but to pay lorry fare, So all those connections helped. I'm seated here today, I get one salary, but that salary, if you look at the number of people who depend on it, So connections, nobody should, don't let anybody tell you that connections are bad. It's the kind of connections that we use, especially to access public resources, public spaces and appointments to the disadvantage of others, that will say that is our bane. That so they say, parents are saying that their children should attend good schools, because if you go to schools, you have good classmates who are likely to end up as judges, as parliamentarians, and etc. I went to Navrongo Secondary School in the upper. Well, now if you are talking about is it category A schools or etc., perhaps it doesn't fall in, And so that whole thing that all your life you should just be looking at how you can game the system, for me, it's not the same. But connections as plan B, that you are connected to people, that you are able to fall on people for assistance, I think. Of course, the reality is that if you don't have contacts in Ghana, there's very little that you, even to get meter for your house, even to get meter, do you know somebody at ECG? Then you go and then postings come, I want my child to go to this school. So those connections rule everything, Even when you take your child or your child to the secondary school, you are looking for a teacher on campus. And so this is my son or this is my nephew. I'm putting him or her in your hands. Take care of this. And why that special thing? Isn't it the responsibility of the teacher to take care of all the children? So I think this whole thing of connections as plan B at that level, maybe we should try to have a second look at that one. Why have the youth been disempowered? I think there are a number of reasons. One, there's a whole thing about tradition. That our traditions, in most cases, privilege age. That what the elderly old man can see sitting down, the young person can climb the tallest tree and will not see what, etc., etc. There may be some truth in that, but it's not always the case. Especially if we are moving away from oral tradition, oral history. Even if you are 10 years old and you can read, to read some of these things and also gain the kind of wisdom that we talk. So there's a whole issue about tradition. But of course, not completely true, because we've seen young people made chiefs or regents, etc. The young people are also disempowered because also of that, the connections, the networks. They are too young to have the kind of networks that would push them, and maybe if your parents did not attend the kind of schools that gives them access to judges and ministers and etc., then you are at a double disadvantage. So I think that whole thing about the way we use those connections also disempowers and does not favor the young people. You go for work, bring 5 years experience. You've just come out of school. Where are you going to get experience? You start a startup. Where are you going to get the resources for that? And then, so I think that those are the factors that empower the youth, do not favor the youth. But I don't think that we should take it as a given that it can't be changed. It can be changed if we organize, if we begin at our level to begin to challenge those things. We talk a lot of that Achampon didn't do well. For the young people, Achampon was our leader in Ghana, a military ruler from 1973 to, I think, 1978. He introduced the charter, the national charter. I promise on my honor, there was a pledge and then there was a charter. I promise on my honor to be faithful and loyal to Ghana, my motherland. I promise. So starting from those things about inculcating those values. In my school, Monday assembly, you recite the pledge before you go. And the first lesson was on the charter. So as to inculcate that Nkrumah had the young pioneers and etc. We need to start organizing to see how we can change it. If we don't change it, out of all these young people sitting in this room, only 1% will be able to count on your networks and connections to be able to make it in life. The rest will not be able to. So it's up to us, the rest, to come together and see how we can change it. The religious one, they say you stand in the house of the coward and point to the ruins of the house of the brave. That the brave, when you are a coward, you live long. So on the issue of the religious thing, I'm a coward. But just to say that we have not demonstrated the will to be able to regulate. You know, you hear about Rwanda and you hear about Ghana and say, what is this? There was a religious entity that was making noise in the night till dawn. I went to EPA said, hey, the thing, you go and sit down with them. I went to the police said, hey, this one, go to EPA. Nobody was willing to bail the cat. So I think they exercise a certain level of influence that makes them almost untouchable. How do we put pressure on our parliamentarians and our governments to be able to take steps to ensure that we are not, that religious freedom is exercised with, consideration for others? Why is it that when you travel from Ghana to the UK, you would not dare to go and then sing and dance or maybe put out a loudspeaker and call prayers? But when you come to Ghana, you think that it's the right thing to do. So I think those are things that we can all discuss and see how to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. George wants to add a comment.
Just a quick one on the connection thing. I think Alaji has adequately explained the importance of networking. But let me tell you something. The real currency for procuring network is good character. Okay. If you are going to develop the relationships that can enable people to help you, you need to develop the right character. Okay. As I said, Professor Techua was my lecturer 30 plus years ago. When I started work at the Media Foundation for West Africa, she was a board member of the Media Foundation for West Africa. So for all this period, I don't think that I'm the best of boys, but at least I have not gone below the pass mark. Otherwise, I would never have the opportunity to come anywhere near her. It is the same thing with the distinguished fellows and scholars that you see here from the academy. Most of them have known us since we were boys. Okay? So please take this from us. As you walk through life, every step of the way, people remember what you do. Do not think that there is any easy way to cut corners through life and make it. It doesn't exist. Every step of the way, your own colleagues are watching, other people are watching that you don't know. So if you are going to be able to develop the right network, we just want to repeat that it starts from your good character. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? No. Yes, that's Fred. Yeah, the young lady there.
My name is Anita Mponsa Edusei, and I'm a student of Laboni Senior High School. My question is directed to Alhaji Ibrahim. Sir, during your presentation, you made mention that citizens can be brought to the center of democracy in Ghana by challenging decisions that undermine citizens. My question is that I want to know how the government intends to put that particular point into effect or to execute that particular point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other person? Yes.
My name is Dachaga Judith, a student of Laboni Senior High School. My question is to Mr. Ibrahim. Please, you made mention of the unfinished business of democratization. So is it the government of Ghana or the people of Ghana are responsible for that particular project, as in to complete the business of democratization?
Okay, thank you. Okay. Oh, there's somebody right at the back.
Good evening. Good evening. Please, my name is Jalil Hadi. My question is directed to the speakers.
Okay.
The question is that, you see, I can be arrested if I come and make any statement on the media, or negative statement without any knowledge about something. But somebody else can come and make a statement and won't be arrested, because on the media I saw that Abronye DC was arrested, but every day we see Kelvin Taylor insulting people left and right, but he's not arrested.
Yeah.
Why? Please, why is that?
Okay, now we are getting lively. Okay, gone.
There's one more hand.
Somebody else? Yes. The backbenchers, yes. Go on.
So my name is Michael from Accra Academy. So my question is to Mr. Ibrahim. When he was speaking, he made mention of constitutional reform as a foundational step to citizen-centered ceremony. So my question is, are you willing to change the whole constitution or make changes to some of the things in the constitution? Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is the last one, Fred. Okay. Thank you. So, Alaji, you can always pass on something.
George can start with the
Okay.
If I stay long with you, I'll get into trouble. I think, again, you raise a very critical question. What is the nature of punishable content in the media? This is part of the point that I was raising, that we have no clear normative principles and standards that guide our action and the regulatory intervention needed. So as we sit, it depends on who you offend. Okay? At any point in time, that person's degree of influence in the society, okay, and the extent to which they are ready to go. I spoke about a number of scenarios that I gave you the examples of the judges. It looks like the only media crime now is to offend a judge. If you're a journalist, you know where you end. So you raise a question that doesn't have a direct answer. But on the case of Kevin Taylor, keep in mind that Kevin doesn't live here. So there's a certain jurisdictional limitation. I have only noticed one circumstance in which he came to town. And I think that his own movement was interesting because some people had cases against him. At least lawyer Nkrumah had a major matter against him that I'm sure if he had not adopted the hide and seek strategy that he did, he would have been in big trouble in the case involving Ace. But essentially, he is acting offshore. He sneaks in and leaves. If you are using the court to pursue a person like that, by the time you file the necessary processes in court, he's already out. So it doesn't take away the point that you make about the hint that there is or there could be some discrimination in the way media offenses are treated. That's the principle you are raising. You only use this as examples. But I just want you to know that don't follow Kevin because he's acting from, somewhere else. If you are here and we live with you here, we may use a mouse trap to catch you. Thank you.
Thank you. Putting citizens at the center, how can government do it? I think it's a responsibility of both government and we the citizens. Government needs, first of all, the whole issue around constitutional reform, the part that it needs to play to ensure that our constitution, benefits the people, that the constitution is for the people, that the people are able to use the constitution as an instrument, to hold government accountable, to access and benefit from exercising their rights. I think something that government can do. There are other things that are already, they are laws, they are policies, but they are not being enforced. Take the right to protest, the right to demonstrate. That is one of the fundamental ways in which we can exercise our citizenship. We can exercise our agency to say, we disagree with this, we are going to march with placards and say no, and then come back. So long as it is peaceful, but governments have consistently sought to make it impossible. And yet our presidents go out. You've seen pictures of both Nana Addo and John Mahama in the US, in London, and Ghanaian citizens are standing there with placards. And nothing is done to them. They don't harm the president, but they just express themselves and then go back. And yet in Ghana, it's virtually impossible. Even teacher trainees at home who say we want to demonstrate about our unpaid whatever, immediately, the police say no. Then they rush to the judge says no. So just being faithful to just those wants, for me, are things that district assembly, common fund, release it today as, so that they can respond to the issues and needs of their people. Where is it? None. Affirmative action, ensuring that, we create opportunities for all categories of citizens to be able to, be involved in governance. So there are what people will say low-hanging fruits that government can pluck. And I think part of putting citizens at the center also requires that we reform our education system. Both the curriculum, but also ensuring that the outcomes are fit for purpose. Because when you have a citizenry that is educated, that knows its rights, that's able to understand, the whole processes of governance and etc., you'll be able to have people who know their rights and then they are able to challenge. Resource institutions such as the NCCE, that they can undertake those things about civic education, But we set up these institutions and we starve them of money. Shraj is there. They get money for the salaries to go and ensure that administrative justice is listened. So I think those are the low-hanging fruits. The high ones are the constitutional reforms and etc. that I think you and I, as citizens of this country, need to get involved and push to ensure that government, does that. The unfinished bureaucracy, whose responsibility is that it's you, it's I, everyone, including government, including the political parties. It is we benefit, the country benefits if, we do have real democracy, participatory democracy that enables or allows or provides space for citizens to hold government accountable. If we're able to do half of that, I don't think that we'll be going to the IMF, I think for the 18th time or the 17th time, for money.
We've already done 17.
We've done 17, And we are there because we are not able to hold government accountable, and therefore decisions are made that we know, this is going to drive us into the ditch. You know, when we were young, they used to talk about some drunkard with that man, when he's drunk, that's when he drives best. That the only thing is just to lift him and put him in the driver's seat, and that he drives straight home. How people came to that conclusion, I don't know. But I think sometimes our governance is almost about that. That people believe that when government has unfettered powers, they're able to do whatever they want. That is how we will develop. And look at where we are now. So I think the unfinished business is everybody's responsibility, and all of us will benefit if we're able to do that. Particularly you, the young ones coming up. Particularly you, the young ones coming up. The kind of Ghana that we are handing over to you is not fit for purpose. 1% of you will be able to benefit from that system, from that kind of Ghana. 99% of you would not be able to. So it's up to the 99% of you to take an interest in what is happening, to organize with others, to listen to the news, to make opinions, to just get together and see what you can do so that together we'll work together, make Ghana a better place. Wholesale, the changes to the constitution, wholesale or not, if you ask me, I would say, look, we just need to have a new constitution. And I'm speaking on just as an individual, but it is not feasible. It is not feasible. So what are the incremental changes that we can make? You know, is it independence in the shortest possible time, or independence now? A new constitution now, or an incrementalist approach to, changing the constitution? That one is up for debate. But I think that we need to change, especially the most regressive parts of the constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. George Sapon and Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko. We have had a stimulating evening. We've had a lot of things. I was hoping our men in uniform would ask some questions, but I know the hierarchy and you don't want to speak out of 10, but I do hope that as you come here, you will feel at home, that this is a space for all of us. You are also citizens. You are citizens before you are policemen. So the space is also for you. But as I stand here, I'm just, and I think Alhaji was talking about educational reforms. I'm thinking about when I was in Wesley Girls and I had the opportunity to attend public lectures in Cape Coast as a student. These things are very important. The exposure to ideas beyond the classroom, to larger ideas. We may not understand everything, and we are really, I know it's hard. There are so many issues, very complicated issues, and it's all being done in a very short time, in different styles, and so it's hard to absorb. But I do hope that you take notes and you reflect on some of these issues that have been raised. I think our two speakers have raised very important issues. They've come at them from different directions. So Mr. Sapon started from Athenian democracy, etc. But I think the core points that he makes about, this whole series is about citizens. Even when we have the power, we are giving it to government. It's about discovering ourselves as citizens and the power that we have. We started with the Constitution, the preamble, we the people. He didn't say this is the government who is giving you the Constitution. He said we the people. And we talk about the sovereignty of the people. I don't know how many of you here, especially the students, have read the Constitution, but I will encourage you, take it up and read. Because like this was showing, think some ideas are too complicated. Therefore, we will not even engage with it and we'll leave it to the government. If you leave it to the government, they will do it that they want. What do you want? You understand all of those kinds of issues. And when George was speaking, after he talked about informed citizens actually privilege the place of knowledge. It doesn't just talk about citizens. He had informed citizens in his title. So to be able to exercise citizenship, you need to know what it is that you have as a citizen. You have to be informed. You must have that knowledge. And he also talked about burden. A burden is something that you carry. It's an obligation. So what does it do? You get the entitlements, but you also get the obligation. And he stressed the common good. And I think the common good issue goes back to the point about networks. We have become a society where we are so focused on ourselves that we forget the common good. Somebody wrote an article, I think, was it an ambulance story, about how we have public challenges in Ghana and we try to find private solutions. Okay? Public challenges, private solutions. Electricity is not working, so you buy your generator. You know, how long can you run the generator for? At what cost? And then it's like, oh, as for me, I have a generator, I have solar, I have this. And then you drive in darkness to get to your generator and that. When the issue should be the public goods that should be fixed for everybody. Alhaji was talking about the center. And I was wondering where the center was. This weekend, there were videos circulating in Wager after the rains. There was this woman with like her whole household collection on a boat. And they get to a point where they are almost sinking. And everybody is telling them, no, no, no. And then basically they are telling her. So in the end, they abandon the boat. And the woman just gets off with her bag to safety. Because otherwise, she would have drowned. This is Wager, just outside of Accra. So this issue about where the center is, putting people at the center is not only geographic. You know, it is also, I think a few weeks ago, we had a lecture here where the person was using heat maps to show us where things are. So we do have these large distortions, the fact of lack of public services and provision. So all of these things are tied, and it is up to, sometimes you think that we are kept focused on our private problems so that we cannot raise the bigger issues, right? You kept talking about survival. If you are so focused on survival, then maybe you think that the budget is too complicated. When they are trying to explain something about the energy situation, it's too complicated. Let me secure my own. But both of them are important because however you secure yourself, there are things you cannot insure against. The Minister of Health told us a few weeks ago that only 5% of public hospitals in Ghana have the full range of medical equipment. So it doesn't matter how rich you are. You can be very rich and you can go to those same hospitals and the CT scan is not there, is not working, the MRI is not working, and you will die, even if you are in the center of the city. So I think that this issue about keeping ourselves informed, thinking about the common good, and of course, the complications that come with, especially when we are being introduced to the age of disinformation and the functioning of institutions, have all brought out very fully. And then Alhaji chose a very different style by telling us that when we think about citizens, we seem to think that it is a homogeneous concept. And yet within it, there's a lot of heterogeneity, there's a lot of diversity. We're talking about those women, youth, persons with disabilities, people who live in rural areas, people who, really. So if even the people in the urban areas are suffering this level of neglect, how much more people who are far off? And it means that we need to really think about how we put citizens at the center of our democracy. And the issues that he raised at the end, his 4-point agenda, the constitutional reform, he emphasized very much the issue of institutions, the issue of excessive power that we have concentrated in the presidency and how it is used. And of course, it's not just appointing people. When people are appointed, they must be paid, right? They must get vehicles, they must get phones. So all the things, the money that could have been used for public investment is being spent in these kinds of ways. And then it's about the welfare, upholding citizen welfare. It's about the goods and services that we don't have. Accra Academy, yes, I can imagine the areas around now with all the rain, how it is looking. You can barely drive in Accra when it rains now. How about, this is Accra, how about the rural areas? Driving from Kumasi to Accra to Kumasi or to Cape Coast or further inland, it's a nightmare. And this is how citizens' welfare being upheld in this way. We had some very concrete examples about how to deepen citizen participation beyond elections. And I was thinking, I was reminded, I used to live in Hacho, and getting towards Domi, I won't mention the party, there was a party office. It will be very active during getting to elections. Immediately the elections are over, they sell flour and rice in that office. Okay? So really, the parties are about people to vote and get to power. But it's not about to exercise, to really deepen citizen participation. Accra Academy, I'm sorry it's late and you must go. We'll see you again next time. And then it's also about the cost of citizen disengagement, which is really very deep. This is how insecurities and jihadist movements are formed in other places. And we need to actively think about it. So I'd like to ask you to join me again in thanking our speakers for a very stimulating lecture, and hope to see you again.
It is my task to close the session, but I think I would begin from where the chair lady left off by asking you again to join hands in just applauding our speakers and congratulating them for an excellent presentations. Your insights have been thoughtful and engaging, and I think they no doubt have provided the basis for a greatly enriching discussion. We have been asked to be, as citizens, to be active participants in reasoned public deliberation, right? In order for us to realize the ideals of our democracy, and to realize the ideals of our democracy not in the procedural sense, not the procedural ideals, but the substantive ideals of our democracy, because you see, we may possess a form of democracy without realizing its substance. I mean, how profound can that thought be? We may be priding ourselves on being a democratic state with democratic citizens without having a clue of how erosive and corrosive the substantive ideals of democracy are in this context in which we are. We thank you very much for that. I mean, it pressed on, I think it was a young man from Accra Academy who asked whether if we therefore have to go for constitutional review, whether we should have a wholesale review or partial review. And I'm glad that the chair of the Constitutional Review Commission is here, sir. I mean, I think this is striking very much at a very foundational question. You know, we've heard a lot about addressing the pragmatic problems that have emanated from our democracy, but I think the conceptual questions are also very important. I mean, because as the foundations that I think we all know shape the culture and the institutions of democracy. So is it a question of looking at the foundational questions? What democracy is it that we have? Alhaji, your distinction between the procedural and the substantive one recalls an article that was written by a political philosopher in this country in 1986 called Consensual Democracy, a plea to a non-party polity, where he distinguishes between what he calls formal democracy and substantive democracy. And I think it's basically what you're saying here. So it's a discussion that we need to keep having, and I'm very happy that the chair of the Constitutional Review Commission is here. Let me thank our chairwoman for a very succinct summary of the lectures that we've heard and for her very able steering of the process. And to our fellows, my senior colleagues, we thank you for making the time to join us here. Mr. Chair, I'll keep pointing at you to emphasize how happy we are and how honored we are that you were able to come and join us here at this forum today. Dear students, your other colleagues have left, but oh my goodness, how penetrating your questions were. It's been a pleasure having you. Keep coming, like the chair lady said, to these kinds of engagements because these are what forms you both as scholars when you grow up and as citizens as well. So we're very happy for your presence here and for the fantastic questions that you were able to ask. I wish we had more time so we could take more of your questions, but the few that we have been great questions indeed. And next to our audience, the rest of our audience here in the auditorium and those of you online, thank you very much for staying with us, for staying so long with us. Young ladies and gentlemen, please, when you just step out there at the foyer, there is some refreshments for you that you can take along with you, okay? And this also goes to the rest of our guests here. Please, when you step out of here, just right there at the foyer, you would have some refreshments to up your sugar levels before you get into your vehicles to go. Thanks a lot for coming. Please don't forget that tomorrow is the concluding day of the 3 days of lectures, and we encourage you to join us again for another fantastic and stimulating day. Thank you very much for coming.